Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode, the fourth one in our series covering the history of Chinese medicine. This is Laszlo Montgomery, as usual, and you're listening to the China History Podcast. Last time in part 3, we did a lot of jumping around. We looked at pulsology, Shennong's materia medica, and a whole bunch of important figures in the history of Chinese medicine. Ge Hong, Wang Shuhe, Wang Bing, Gong Qingxuan, Chao Yuanfang, Wang Tao, Sun Simiao, and Su Jing. We looked at them and all the milestone books they wrote and compiled. And thanks to the growth in intra-Asian commerce, there was also a free exchange of information and good ideas, and this included medical knowledge spread far and wide in every direction along the sea lanes and Silk Road routes that saw so much traffic during the Tang Dynasty. These years, late 6th to early 10th centuries, they really saw a lot of progress, and not just freshening up old information. Entirely new discoveries were being made that began to come to the rescue of Chinese patients with many kinds of chronic and acute afflictions. The Anshi, or Anlushan Rebellion, was put down in 763. Despite all the damage and depopulation and the hit to the royal Li family's Tang Dynasty, they still lasted for another 144 years. You know, the old saying, immortalized in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the empire long divided must unite, long united must divide. Thus it has ever been. Well, from 907 to 960, a post-Tang divided China was ruled by a series of 5 dynasties in the northern part of the former empire and a quick succession of 10 kingdoms down in the southern part of China, and one of these being the Southern Han. And those of you who listen to the History of Guangzhou series remember the Southern Han Dynasty, 917, 971, one of the more important of the 10 kingdoms. When the empire is divided, history has shown it was often a fertile period in Chinese religion, literature, and art. It wasn't so conducive to many other studies, including medicine. But this period of disunity from 907 to 960 was followed up with a glorious period in Chinese history, culture, literature, the arts, and in the sciences as well. Last episode, we looked at many of the more noteworthy physicians and books from the Tang. Today, we'll do the same with the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279. I mentioned last time all the free flow of people back and forth from the Middle East, Africa, Central and Southeast Asia, and the Far East. One of the unanticipated consequences of that was a noticeable boost in the velocity of how fast information, ideas, and innovation got passed around the world. Every book considered of particular great importance during the Tang and into the Song ultimately made its way to Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, 3 places where educated people were able to read Chinese characters. In the Song Dynasty, during the salad days of Emperor Renzong, the celebrated inventor Bi Sheng came out with movable type printing. His invention used baked clay to mold the individual characters. It didn't have the bang that woodblock and movable metal type would have in the printing industry, but Bi Sheng's invention did facilitate the advancement of printing to a new level. Because the speed and cost came down sufficient to allow a wider market of buyers to afford these printed medical and other texts, more physicians were able to keep these most revered reference books in their own medical libraries. The propagation of medical knowledge wasn't as efficient as it is today, that's for sure. And back in the Song, they didn't enjoy the benefit of all these medical conferences, peer-reviewed papers, and everything else. But the most important discoveries and treatments did get printed more widely than in the past. When you read the official Song histories, where medicine was concerned, one after another, new breakthroughs in the understanding of the human body were being made, And all of these discoveries appeared in these books from the finest medical minds of a dynastic period that was brimming with greatness in every direction. Just as the new technologies of today are causing a sea change in the publication industry, the new technologies of the Song did likewise. It was so much easier in the 11th and 12th centuries to get books published and printed. Even Su Dongpo got into the medical books business. This great poet and everyman collaborated with Shen Kuo on a book. Shen Kuo was one of the most renowned of China's great polymaths. Like Su Dongpo, he had the good fortune to live during the best years of the northern Song. In Shen Kuo's most famous work, the Dream Pool Essays, the Mengxi Bitan, he was the first to describe the principles of a magnetic needle compass. He too had, as part of his bio, had this call to study medicine due to his own poor health as a child. Shen Kuo contributed to the proliferation of medical texts during the Song, especially in pharmacology. He had this collaboration with everybody's favorite, Su Dongpo, which led to the publication of the Su Shen Liangfang, the efficacious prescriptions of Su Dongpo and Shen Kuo. Yeah, thanks to all the advances in printing, there were more books of prescriptions coming out than you could shake a stick at. The government had by now inserted itself in the medical profession and did much to regulate it. In 1057, the Bureau for the Re-Editing of Medical Books, the Jiaozheng Yishu Ju, was established. This government office was charged with collecting, collating, and verifying all known medical texts from the past 1,000 years. They were also in charge of regulating the printing of new medical texts and going back and correcting all the mistakes and misinformation of previously published works. All of the most important texts that I've mentioned in parts 2 and 3 were given imperially sanctioned official editions. These Song Dynasty versions of the great texts became a new standard in the accumulated knowledge and understanding of Chinese medicine. This was something done not only for all the great medical texts going back to the beginning, in Confucian philosophy as well, in subsequent dynasties, and especially in the Song with the flourishing of Neo-Confucianism. All the old, outdated material was given a makeover to bring it up to snuff, and then the emperor put his stamp of approval on it. Chen Shiwen and Pei Zongyuan were two imperial court physicians of the early 12th century who published a text called the Heji Jufang, Prescriptions from the Pharmacy of Harmonious Assistance. After Song Emperor Huizong gave the royal command to update the old formulas, 297 prescriptions were codified and many corrections were made. And officials in this government bureau I just mentioned, responsible for all of China's medical texts, went out to the countryside and mixed with the people out there. And these agriculturalists, for more than 5,000 years or even more, revealed to these officials some of their own proven folk remedies, and many of these, too, were added to this Heji Jufang, or as it's also called, the Taiping Huimin Heji Jufang. And China's 12th century med students had to memorize all of these recipes and prescriptions by heart. It was the most authoritative book of prescriptions throughout the Song. And along with the Shanghan Lun, this text, the Prescriptions from the Pharmacy of Harmonious Assistance, were among the most indispensable books in the medical profession. Because there were so many new discoveries being made and so many old prescriptions rendered ineffective, the number of materia medicas, or buncals, that came out during the Song was more than ever before in the history of Chinese medicine. Each one was a continuous improvement over the previous landmark text. In Chinese, at least, many of these fang, or prescriptions, became guanfang, or government-controlled or government-sanctioned prescriptions. And these official government drugs became the standard throughout Song China and into the Yuan as well. And a lot of these renowned physicians who worked in a government capacity, well, they weren't called yi shis, or medical doctors, anymore. They were called yi guans, or doctor officials. And again, this whole idea of the central government inserting itself in the middle of the medical profession and regulating the books and the content in the books, all began in the Song. Under the Wang'an reforms of the first half of the 1070s, medical teaching institutions were organized under the Taiju, the Imperial Bureau of Medicine. And this branch of the government supervised all the med schools and institutionalized all the learning. It wasn't exactly like the civil service examination system, but there was a set curriculum and, of course, the imperially sanctioned versions of all the classic texts. And I just mentioned there were also all the formulas and prescriptions that aspiring physicians had to memorize as part of the test. There were 3 levels of exams offering higher degrees. The med school curriculum started off with 13 disciplines that were divided up into either internal medicine, acupuncture, or illnesses of the skin. And pediatrics got lumped in with internal medicine. You can be sure, as the civil service exams were heavy on Confucianism and the 9 books, so too were the med school exams, with their heavy reliance on all the great canonical medical texts going back to the mythical Bianque. You can't understand an automobile unless you pop the hood. Same thing with anatomy. Human dissection went back as far as the Han, but wasn't as widespread as it became in the Song. Printed books were published with illustrations of dissected parts of the body and diagrams. Executed criminals were a main source of cadavers in the Song. The Xi Yuan Ji Lu by Song Ci helped establish the science of forensic medicine. The Xi Yuan Ji Lu, or Collected Cases of Injustice Rectified, became the coroner's handbook. Many nefarious kinds of things were commonplace involving poison and other murderous acts. Just like today's CCTV and other wireless video technologies put a crimp in the felonious activities of a lot of people all over the world. Well, this new study of forensic medicine meant the old tried and true methods of killing someone, it became a lot easier to discover. Song Ci is also called the world's first forensic entomologist. He was expert in examining a dead body and honing in on those arthropods. Through observing them at all the stages of decomposition of a cadaver, he found out all kinds of interesting things. Well, this science of forensic entomology went back to the early 13th century in China and began with Song Ci and this book, The Collected Cases of Injustice Rectified, the Xi Yuan Ji Lu. The Chinese characters means a collection for washing away the wrongs. In choosing this title, Song Ci was sending a message about all these past wrongful convictions, and his objective was to ensure they did not happen again. There are a great number of case studies contained in the book that are filled with observations, analyses, and conclusions that showed in many cases how people got wrongfully convicted. And because he had served as an official and had done all this work he had done, integrating forensic medical science with criminal cases and advancing justice during the last years of the Northern Song imperial government, he's referred to as an Yiguan, not an Yi-shi. He was an Yiguan, a physician official in the employ of the government. Chen Yan, end 12th century, was another important figure from Chinese medicine during the Song. He came out with the theory of the 3 causes, the San Yin. This was contained in his most noted work, the San Yin Ji Yi Bing Zheng Fang Lun. This work maintained there were 3 kinds of pathogens that caused disease: endogenous, exogenous, and the third was anything that didn't fall into those 2 major categories. The endogenous pathogens were affected by the 7 feelings, or the qi qing: joy, anger, vexation, sadness, distress, fear, and fright. The exogenous pathogens were all influenced by the seasons and showed how everyone needed to pay heed to the time of the year and recalibrate their lifestyle to effortlessly be one with the effects of the seasonal changes on your health and overall well-being. The exogenous pathogens included wind, cold, heat, humidity, and drought. The third category was a catch-all for any other kind of illness, including random acts of violence, wounds from battle, chance falls and breaks, and other acts of God. In the Song, there began to appear more of these government-sponsored zhensuos, or clinics, or urgent care offices where people could get medical care or advice. Now, this was only in the major cities, of course, but this idea of public clinics becoming something common in the Song, this was all tied into the big picture of the central government getting involved in medical care and, to some degree, of wellness for the Chinese Laobaixing. And matters regarding public hygiene were also addressed more seriously than before. By the 10th or 11th centuries, most physicians were amply wise to the idea that the more filthy the community, the more rampant disease was. Whenever little or no attention was paid to public hygiene, in the cities at least, diseases of all sorts were more apt to happen. And though there's some smoke that indicates some Tang-era scientists knew how to inoculate people against smallpox, by the Song, this was all figured out and documented. Let's talk about Qian Yi. In all the bios I read about him, he had a different set of dates for birth and death, but he passed away around 1117, a good decade before the Jurchens came and put the northern Song out of business and sent the Zhao royal family on their humiliating one-way journey to Heilongjiang. Qian Yi was among the greatest names from Song Dynasty medicine, and in some ways, all of early Chinese medicine. He achieved his fame and reputation in the field of pediatrics. In the Book of Song, he was lauded for devoting 40 years of his life studying this field that focused on the health and medical care of infants, children, and adolescents. Up to that time in the late Northern Song, pediatrics had never been its own branch of medicine, and his groundbreaking work on this subject was called the Yingru Lun, the Treatise on Infants and Children. Remember last episode I mentioned how Sun Si Miao supposedly said how women were 10 times more difficult to treat than men? Well, in the Song, there was a rejoinder to this that said children were even 10 times more difficult to treat than women. The primary reason given was the inability to communicate symptoms. All of Qian Yi's teachings were written down by one of his pupils, Yan Jizhong, also known as Yan Xiaozhong. And Yan published his master's teaching into books called Xiao Er Yao Zheng Zhi Jue, The Appropriate Way of Recognizing and Treating Infant Maladies. This is a monograph on pediatrics under the umbrella of TCM. It was 3 volumes of material concerning information about children's sicknesses, including prescriptions and treatments. This work is particularly noteworthy because it's the world's first surviving work on pediatric medicine that has made it down to our day in its original form. I don't know how many times I've had to mention how some great book ended up getting lost due to chaos or natural disasters. Well, that wasn't the case all the time. And thanks to all the new technologies in printing and archiving, more copies of important works were produced, and with more copies floating around the country, there was less chance of any losses of the entire work. There were great advances in Chinese medicine during the Song, but as far as pediatrics, gynecology, and obstetrics, there was a downright great leap forward. They all became pretty much their own branches of medicine during the Song. And for all the pioneering work he did, Qian Yi is honored with the rare honorific term not just given to anybody. He was called the Sheng, as well as the Bizu, the sage of pediatrics and the founder or originator of pediatrics. That Sheng, honorific sage or saint, it didn't get handed out too readily. You had to be someone extraordinary from Chinese history to be called the Sheng, or saint of something. Confucius, Mengzi, Lu Yu, just to name a few. Wang Weiyi is worth mentioning for his work on acupuncture during the Song. Acupuncture had been declining in popularity by the Song. Wang Weiyi is remembered, among other reasons I'll get to, with bringing acupuncture back as a popular treatment for patients. I didn't mention this, but between the Tang and the Song, acupuncture had become less of a go-to treatment, and thanks to the work of Wang Weiyi, it made quite a comeback. He too was fortunate to work during the best years of the northern Song, serving as a high-ranking minister overseeing the medical profession. Wang Weiyi is probably best remembered as the creator of these iconic bronze statues, or tiansheng tongren, that were engraved with all the acupuncture points, or xue. There were two statues, one for a man and one for a woman. And the precision with which these statues were cast and the exact locations of all the acupoints provided a significant step up in the practice of acupuncture, especially in the teaching of new acupuncturists. I'm sure many of you have seen miniature replicas of these tiansheng tongren, or heavenly sage bronze person. It's one of the major icons of the science of acupuncture. Wang Weiyi also produced the Tongren Shu Xue Zhenjiu Tu Jing, the illustrated manual of the bronze man that illustrated and explained all the acupuncture and moxibustion points. And this work was also engraved into stone steles and publicly displayed. And this was the first national-level, imperially sanctioned compilation of the acupuncture points. Another holy relic from ancient times that we discussed in Part 1 was the Nanjing, attributed to no less a sacred cow than Bianque himself, Qin Yue Ren. The full name of this work was the Yellow Emperor's Canon of 81 Difficult Issues. Well, besides all the innovations and important work he did for acupuncture, Wang Weiyi also worked on this book to give it a freshening up. Wang Weiyi's work on the Nanjing was a good example how, in the Song, carrying on the time-old tradition of writing commentaries on past classics continued on. The Shang Han Lun was still holding up pretty well since the time of its author, Zhang Zhongjing. But there had been so many new discoveries and things that physicians of Zhang Zhongjing's time in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD knew nothing about. So these Song commentaries would fine-tune the great landmark works. As I'm recording this, now my brother-in-law up in Santa Clara just passed away from lung cancer this morning. This disease has been the scourge of humankind since the earliest civilizations. Well, during the Song, cancer research in China also took on a life of its own. And the Chinese character for cancer, Ai, made its debut in the Song. Let me also mention someone rather interesting. This was Su Song, another polymath in the tradition of Shen Kuo. He's mostly remembered for his water-powered armillary sphere and celestial globe tower, the Shui Yun Yixiang Tai, the world's first hydromechanical astronomical clock tower. This was completed in 1092. Hydraulics was employed to provide motive power in rotating an armillary sphere for astronomical observation. This was built at the Song capital of Kaifeng. Su Song also invented other water clocks that used water flow to power the clock's movements. Anyone who has walked through Terminal 3 at Beijing PKX Airport has seen the giant model of this great Chinese invention, the armillary sphere. These provided a model of objects in the heavens relative to the earth and the sun. Anyway, this model built by Su Song is also called the cosmic engine and the water-driven spherical bird's-eye view map of the heavenly constellations. One of Su Song's areas of specialty was astronomy. Well, in the history of Chinese medicine, Su Song took the lead in the compilation of the illustrated classic of materia medica, the Bencao Tu Jing. This did for the Xinqiu Bencao what that Tang Dynasty materia medica did to previous pharmacological works. This new Song Dynasty work became the new standard in the country as far as the most authoritative and updated work of its kind, and it was government approved as well. And this materia medica was beautifully illustrated with all kinds of woodcut images. It was a work of not only pharmacology, but of natural history as well. This illustrated classic of materia medica also discussed botany, zoology, chemistry, philosophy, religion, literature, politics, and many other subjects, compiling and updating all the past great works together with everything new in the current times was a practice that the Chinese medical historians and scholars never stopped doing. Su Song's Bun Sao Tu Jing was just one more in a series of these uber compilations and compendia. It contains 640 drugs and 933 woodcut pictures. Some medicines were drawn in a single illustration, and some had more than one picture associated with the prescription. Su Song masterfully compiled all this known information in great detail and had everything organized in such a way as to make it easy to navigate. And a great number of these remedies were empirically proven treatments to specific diseases. It was another mandatory desk reference for any physician who saw patients in their clinic. It contained many case studies as well and didn't just list out prescriptions. It also gave the underlying pharmacology of everything being used. It even gave qualitative explanations about what specimens within a species was inferior or superior in its effectiveness, and how to spot counterfeit ingredients. The detail that it went into for each and every substance was never seen before in previous works. On the one hand, for its time, it was an all-in-one encyclopedic source that provided the most necessary things to know about medicine. And we could look back on the Bun Sao Tu Jing and contemplate how great it must have been in its day. But well, more than 900 years later, we can see it was still rather simplistic and would hardly pass muster with sticklers in our time when it comes to experimental design. With the practice of medicine rising in respectability, and since it had become a profession that required a person to be highly educated, many young and old Confucian scholars and officials migrated to this profession. In a strict Confucian sense, one could use this medical knowledge to treat their parents, so there was a filial element to it. Being educated and trained in this profession allowed someone to serve society in a valuable way. So in the Song, quite a few of these traditional Confucian scholars, they branched out into more practical things, going back to the old Wu shamans and folk doctors of China's Bronze Age. Well, while they played an integral role in society, frankly speaking, one didn't need to be educated to fulfill this role, and it was more something you were born into rather than aspired to become. In the Song, with so much of the medical profession now institutionalized and with the requirements to practice quite stringent and with a med school curriculum that included a lot of overlap with the civil service examinations, a lot of these scholar bureaucrat types also trained to become physicians. This began in the Song, but really blossomed in the Yuan, with less options open for Confucian scholars aspiring to join the bureaucracy. And these new Confucian physicians, they competed against all the traditional hereditary practitioners, these families of doctors who passed down their knowledge and experience to the next generation, creating these dynasties of physicians. Another great Song dynasty, Buncao, or materia medica, was the Zhenglei Buncao. And the physician associated with this book was Tang Shenwei. He came from a long line of physicians and scholars in his family. When he stepped up to direct this big materia medica project that he initiated, all he was doing was repeating the tasks that previous men of his type had done when they took it upon themselves to bring the understanding of medicine up to the present day's level. It was the same old work every time. Some medical texts had longer staying power than others, and these massive general materia medicas and encyclopedias and other compendia with a wide spectrum of topics had to be updated from time to time. And like I said, in these more sophisticated times of the Song dynasty, 10th to 13th centuries, information became outdated a lot faster than in past dynasties. And by the Song, you could see there is a clear parting of the ways with regard to all the macrocosmic rhythms that humans were just one part of. The practitioners of far-out Taoist healing rituals and unscientific folk remedies were kept separate from the more respectable gentleman scholar physicians. We've seen how in the Zhou and prior to the Zhou and into the Han as well, shamans and feng shis were the first doctors. And as we got closer and closer to these days in the Song, the blurred line between the two became very distinct. They were not the same anymore. And Tang Shanwei was yet another northern Song great from the history of Chinese medicine for this Jingshi Zhenglei Beiji Bencao, or just Zhenglei Bencao, as I just mentioned. In English, it goes by the name Zhenglei Materia Medica. 1,748 drugs were listed, of which more than a quarter of them were new. There were almost 4,000 treatments detailed that included portions of text that had long been thought to have vanished. It was considered to be a massive work, 32 volumes, 600,000 characters. This Zhenglei Materia Medica came out in 1082, same year that Su Shi wrote his famous poem, Lin Jiang Xian, Ye Gui Lin Gao, returning to Lin Gao at night. This Zhenglei Materia Medica was the biggest, most complete, most current, and widely used of all materia medicas going back to the original Shennong version of the early Han Dynasty. It was continually tweaked and revised for the next several centuries, and up to the time of the most renowned physician of the Ming Dynasty, Li Shizhen, this was the gold standard that was referred to as the most accepted materia medica in China. All of the government ministries and bureaus that oversaw the medical profession and the publication of medical texts continued on into the Jurchen Jin Dynasty and into the Yuan. I guess one of the most noteworthy things that came out of this period in the history of Chinese medicine were the Jin Yuan Sida Jia, or the Sida Ming Yi, the four great physicians of the Jin and Yuan dynasties. These were Liu Wansu, Jiang Congzheng, Li Gao, and Zhu Zhanheng. All four were renowned during those two dynasties for their theoretical works that dealt with the nature of cold and hot on a number of categories of diseases. Not temperature cold. This was in the yin-yang, 5 elements, and qi sense, and the impact of these forces, which were cold or cooling, and which were hot or warming. Some herbs were considered warming, some were classified as cooling, and physicians would employ one or the other to make a positive transformation in the organ in the body that's affected by disease. And they produced theoretical works that, during the Jin and Yuan, were considered quite cutting edge. Let's close out part 4 with a look at Hu Si-hui. He lived during the Yuan. No info on when he was born or when he died. We only know Hu Si-hui began serving as the court dietitian and nutritionist to Yuan Emperor Renzong in 1315. So that puts his birth around the end of the Song, beginning of the Yuan. Renzong, or Buyantu Khan, was the 4th Yuan emperor and great-grandson of Kublai Khan. And the marquee anecdote from Hu Si-hui's time serving Renzong concerned the vegetable soup that he prepared for the ailing emperor. Renzong had been suffering from some kidney ailment, and no one was able to do anything to bring him relief. And then came Hu Si-hui, who diagnosed Renzong's illness, cooked up this therapeutic soup, and in less than a month, the emperor was fully cured. We remember Hu Si-hui because he was the first one who came along to champion the idea of proper nutrition for one's own personal well-being and what to consume when one is ill with any malady or affliction. And the book that gave him immortality in the history of Chinese medicine was the Yin Shan Zheng Yao, the Dietary Principles of Food and Drink. And this came out in 1330. Remember from part 2 when we looked at the Yellow Emperor's inner canon? The book opens with the Yellow Emperor asking Qi Bo, and I'm paraphrasing, how come people in antiquity were so healthy and lived so long and people nowadays don't live long? Well, Hu Si-hui believed in the same notion as Qi Bo. Hu Si-hui believed, compared to the people of antiquity, the Laobaixing of the 14th century lost that discipline to live their life with moderation, including in what they ate and drank. And because of this refusal to live a balanced life and not exercising moderation in how they carried out their lives, people were beset with all kinds of infirmities by the time they were 50. With respect to eating and drinking, the rule of thumb that Hu Sihui promoted was not too much and not too little. In his book, the Yin Shan Zheng Yao listed 230 kinds of foods and what the benefits of each were. It also gave a lot of information on healthy eating. And a great deal of the explanations involved yin, yang, the 5 elements, hot, cold, and the zang fu organs. The zang organs, if you recall, were the heart, liver, spleen, lungs, and kidneys. And the fu organs were the small and large intestines, gallbladder, bladder, stomach, and the sanjiao triple burner. And each organ was associated with one of the 5 elements. The book is also filled with recipes, prescriptions, and healthy concoctions that had been sourced all throughout China and other parts of the Mongol Empire. And the other famous story associated with Hu Sihui concerns one of the recipes in the Yin Shan Zheng Yao. This was a kind of roasted duck that it said was the forerunner of the world-famous Peking duck that began showing up in restaurants around 1416.
Believe it or not.
Thanks, Mr. Palance. Prior to Hu Sihui, a spotlight had never been shown on the criticality of a good diet and good nutrition to human health and longevity. Okay, I think I'm going to cut it short here, and in part 5, we can start fresh with the Ming Dynasty. The focus today was mostly on the history of Chinese medicine in the Song Dynasty. The main takeaway, after listening to the first 3 episodes of this series, is that this was an extraordinary time in the development of public health care and the understanding and nature of diseases and how to treat them, and prevent them too. Once again, let me mention, February 1st, 2024, I'll be in London as part of the ribbon-cutting ceremonies and gala events marking the opening of an exhibition at the London Science Museum. Direct from the Hall of Clocks at the world-famous Palace Museum in Beijing, I cordially invite you to come see Zimingzhong Ning Shi Juzhen, Clockwork Treasures from China's Forbidden City. On display will be an exquisitely curated collection of 23 stunning Zimingzhong mechanical chime clocks at the London Science Museum. And it all starts on February 1st. So everyone over the past 13 years who said, if you ever make it to London, I'd love to meet up, well, opportunity is knocking at your door. I look forward to seeing you. I'll be in town for a whole week. Don't be shy. All right, enough of the PSAs. I thank you all for listening. This is Laszlo Montgomery signing off from Los Angeles in the state of confusion. Think about coming back again next time for another pretty good episode of the China History Podcast.